What is going to be the impact, or what impact are you already seeing to Asian companies from MiFID II rollout on January 3rd?
Good morning, Steve.
Good morning.
Very good to be on the show. The impact of MiFID will be very broad. It's a very broad piece of regulation. So it varies from consumer protection, for example, the possibilities of product intervention, but also very much about trading, more transparency around trading, and bringing more light to the capital markets. And obviously, capital markets are global.
Yep.
And so if you do business across border, if you do business related to the EU, there's a big chance that you will be caught by MiFID II.
Right. So what impact are you seeing in Asian companies? We've already seen reports that Nomura is considering restructuring its research operations. Do you feel other Asian banks perhaps are struggling to price their research services?
Well, this is one of the impacts of MiFID II. It's a deliberate impact, moving to the unbundling of research and execution. Right. And so if Asian or North American brokers are providing services to EU asset managers, they need to make sure that it's unbundled and that there's transparency around research and separately transparency around execution. And we truly believe that it will improve the research market, is that it will make it more efficient, and also is that you can better choose which broker is good for execution and which broker is good for research, or even a specialized research house.
Well, with this 6-month LEI extension, legal entity identifier, do you think more Asian companies are, though, still lagging to secure their LEI?
Well, this LEI issue and the 6 months for issuers from outside the EU into the EU, that was a very specific problem. There might be Asian issuers that are listed in the EU without their consent, without their approval, and you can understand that it is then a bit more complicated to get the LEI. And so we expected that this can now be solved within this half-year period.
Now, do you think also that this, there have been warnings, of course, MiFID could discourage Asian traders because they have to, supply their personal identifications. There's a number of other requirements. Do you think this could discourage Asian traders into Europe?
Well, that were some of the predictions, let's say, before the 3rd of January, is that it would be, there would be barriers to trade because people wouldn't have their LEIs. And as we can now see, and looking back on the 3rd of January, it was a quite smooth start. And so there's not any indication, indeed, that there would be less trading by, let's say, traders outside the EU into products of the EU.
Yeah. Are you having to battle, though, a perception issue?
Well, as a regulator, there's always the need to emphasize, what are the objectives, what are we trying to achieve. Clearly, rules and regulations imply costs for those that are active in financial markets, but it's also very important to see the benefits. In this case, this is about more investor protection, greater transparency, more standardization. And so it's important that we emphasize that as regulators.
Because I was bringing up the Moody's story, which I'm sure you've read from overnight, basically saying the MiFID II is going to be credit negative for Europe's asset management industry. How do you weigh the downside risks to these beefed up regulation?
Well, it's clear that that MiFID II, with the greater transparency around costs and also with the unbundling, is that it will make asset management more competitive. And I think from the standpoint as an investor, that is a preferred direction, because you will pay lower charges. It will improve the performance of your product. So that is not necessarily a negative from, let's say, an investor perspective.
Do you see it, though, equity research going the way of bond research, where they have the ratings agency, they pay for ratings, or they pay for the research there, so you have basically sponsored research? Is that the way it's going?
Well, the way it will there's still the possibility under MiFID is that clients, the ultimate investor, pays for research, but it's slightly more complex. There's a bit of administration required around that, and then indeed there's the possibility of direct payments by the asset managers, and they can pay that either to the broker, but they can also pay it to an independent research house, or they can build their own research capacities as an asset manager.
How about the caps on dark pool trading? You had to delay them. You couldn't meet the deadline on those caps by January 3rd. Can you commit to the caps being enforced by March, or is it going to have to be delayed yet further?
Yeah, this was one of the glitzes of the start on the 3rd of January, so there is a lot more data collected under MiFID II than under MiFID I, and so we have now at EU level a complete picture of the financial instruments across the EU, but we also need to have information on the amount of trading, let's say, in the dark pools and what is in the lit market, and so that we can start this instrument where you limit the amount of dark pool trading. We need to rely there on data that we get from the trading venues. That hasn't worked as we had hoped for. We're now working hard together with the national regulators and the trading venues to get these data and to make sure that we can start this in March.
How much of your discussions, or are they, involved in the rise and use, not necessarily as much institutionally, but at least in the public, and the use of cryptocurrencies? And how that factors in? Well,
we obviously are, as a regulator, we are monitoring financial innovations. Financial markets are about innovation, and so we have a dedicated team within ESMA which is monitoring financial innovations, and we're looking at their developments. We have warned in November last year for so-called ICOs, where we saw that there were a very high risk for retail investors because you basically have, you have no rights, there's no clarity on your rights, and you can lose all of your money.
Do you expect more regulation, though, to come on cryptocurrencies in Europe, as they've done in China? They crack down on ICOs, and South Korea also is worried about the youth, flittering away their money. They want to institutionalize it. Do you see more regulation in Europe?
Well, as a regulator, you always need to monitor the financial innovation and apply the right tool at the right moment. We have already started to look into blockchain, for example, 2-3 years ago, seeing whether that could develop under the existing regulatory framework. We have just done the warning on the ICO, and currently we are very well monitoring also what is happening with the Bitcoin. But clearly, it is a very important topic here at the Asian conference. Also, the spread seems to be broader here in Asia among the retail consumers. But every regulator needs to use the tools depending on the local situation.
Because Jamie Dimon called it a fraud, then he backtracked a bit. Is it a bit of a fraud?
Well, it is clear that it is called a currency, but very important characteristics of currencies are not there. It is an extremely volatile value, which undermines its use as a currency, and it's also not broadly accepted. And people that are investing in this, they should be prepared to lose all of their money. And then we know that in some cases also this attracts people that have less good intentions. There might be fraud or there might be money laundering.
Let's talk about Brexit's impact as well on MiFID. Already there are calls for MiFID's open access requirements between clearinghouse and actual trading venues to be reviewed. Do you see a review necessary given Brexit?
I think it's important that on the open access, I think it's extremely important that we move in that direction. More competition is an important part of MiFID II. We just discussed the area of costs in the area of asset management. It's also important that we maintain this open access provision, but it was always known that there was this possibility to have a delayed start of this open access. Separately from that, we are now obviously preparing for Brexit. The UK regulator has committed to apply MiFID II in full, and of course how it will develop in the longer term will also depend on the broader negotiations.
Yeah, and also where do the trading houses potentially move to as well? Does that factor in?
Well, we first have to, there's now first important to see where the negotiations go, whether there's going to be a transition period. That will all be very important for also to see how MiFID II will develop under Brexit.